A nation divided and our republic threatened. Real America's Voice News brings you an election special with John Solomon.
Hello, America, and welcome to this Just the News special on Real America's Voice Network, The Count, the Courts, and the Constitution. I'm your host, John Solomon, the editor-in-chief of Just the News. And tonight, we'll be talking exclusively to the lawyers leading President Trump's fight in the courts to disqualify hundreds of thousands of ballots that the president argues were illegally counted without required election observers. Think about that, hundreds of thousands of ballots. Now, we'll be asking lawyers Rudy Giuliani, Victoria Toensing, Joe diGenova, and Jenna Ellis how they plan to make their case and what is the best evidence of election fraud, election irregularities, and misconduct that they have found already. We'll also be talking to famed appellate lawyer Alan Dershowitz about what the realistic chances are for the president to succeed in the courts. And then we'll wrap things up with two of my great colleagues from Real America's Voice, the VP of Programming, Dr. Gina Loudon, and former Missouri governor and Just the News TV show host, Eric Greitens. They'll be here later on. But first, a quick word about what we've been doing here at Just the News and Real America's Voice to independently review election integrity issues in the key battleground states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. With a team of more than 30 reporters and editors, we have found clear evidence that scores of GOP poll watchers were ejected from their rightful places to observe vote counting on election night and the day after. We also have confirmed that ballot signature verifications in key states like Nevada just failed. People were able to sign other people's names and get past the security system. We have found precincts where voter turnout was exceedingly high, above 90%, and places where the normal rate of rejecting flawed ballots was historically low. Both of those stats are red flags for the election integrity experts we've been talking to. Now, we have also obtained the testimony of eyewitnesses to alleged irregularities, including longtime Detroit City civil servant Jessie Jacob, who says she witnessed and was instructed to participate in the backdating of thousands of mail-in ballots in Detroit. That's a potential crime. Finally, in numerous states where we have interviewed voters, we have found those who said they're listed as voting when they had not cast a ballot or they submitted a ballot and it was not counted. Those are irregularities that should concern us all. In other words, Just the News and Real America's Voice has confirmed tangible, real evidence of voting irregularities in the battleground states. Now, the question is, were these problems widespread enough to swing the close vote totals in places like Wisconsin and Georgia and Michigan? And is there enough proof to persuade the courts to get involved and possibly throw out large blocks of votes that have been called into question? That truly would be a historic ruling. Now, just a few minutes ago, we had the pleasure of talking to one of the nation's great legal scholars, a constitutional law expert, former Justice Department official, California committee woman, Harmeet Dillon. Here's what she had to say about the ongoing legal fights that are now beginning to play out in the courts. All right, folks, we're now joined by one of the country's great legal scholars, Harmeet Dillon. Harmeet, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me today, John.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. Listen, you've been in the Justice Department. You've fought big cases. You've been watching what's been going on around the country with some of these early lawsuits. What do you think of the Trump team's early legal strategy, this effort to appeal to the courts under the idea that there was unequal protection in the elections that went on in Pennsylvania, Michigan, other places?
Well, one of the challenges of election litigation, which I've done for many years,
Right.
is that you don't necessarily know what, you can't strategize 6 months in advance in a COVID situation, what last minute obstacles are going to be thrown in your way or last minute changes governors, secretaries of state, or even Supreme Courts of a state like Pennsylvania will impose on the election. And so that has been a challenge in this strategy. But when you get to election day or the days before, or in some states where they start canvassing the ballots prior to the election day, they look at the mail-in ballots, you begin seeing patterns and problems. And so what the campaign has done is take different strategies in different states, because each state has the right to control the way it runs its own election. And so,
Right.
for example, in California, they can be counting ballots that are arriving today. There's a 17-day lag that was put into place this year by our legislature between Election Day and the date by which a ballot must be received. In other states, it's Election Day, period, and then there's some in between. So in Pennsylvania, for example, one of the things that they've done is really attacked in court the fact that you have a different outcome with respect to how much your vote counts if you're in certain counties that allow people or chase people, even on a partisan basis, to cure their ballots, which may be defective if they're mail-in ballots, versus a state that takes a more strict traditional approach that you have a chance to vote and that's it. And so that's an equal protection challenge. I think that's being argued in the court as we speak. And the outcome of that is going to be interesting. I think it's a very good legal theory. The question is proving that it's enough of a differential to impact the outcome of the election. And so that's one of the challenges in election law, is that sometimes courts are hesitant to step in and do anything about it if they think the result is foreordained. They're not going to order a new election. They're not going to throw out hundreds of thousands of votes. I've seen, some other people say that maybe hundreds of thousands of votes can be thrown out in Philadelphia because they were not witnessed. That's not a remedy a court is likely to issue. So you really have to look for situations where you can convince the court that by its ruling, it may affect the outcome. Like, in other words, does it matter? And so that's one of the challenges we've had is while counting is going on a rolling basis, to convince a court that it matters. While TV networks call the election on election day while people are still voting,
right,
and votes are still being counted, is the court going to step in and say, my decision may matter? So there's a built-in reticence on the part of the courts to rule on these issues that doesn't exist in many other areas of the law. For example, they're not reticent at all to step into foreign policy, travel bans,
right,
things like that. So there is a political bias built into this whole system as well. And it's kind of sad. So some of these issues that we feel are very important that may affect this outcome and the outcome of future elections, they may never get ruled on because a court may have decided on its own it isn't going to affect the outcome.
Now, we've had a couple elections in the last year that were thrown out. We had a North Carolina House election, a Philadelphia municipal election very recently because of problems with absentee ballots. Do you think that those as a backdrop have any impact on the courts as they go into making these final decisions?
In the case of the North Carolina case, it's my understanding that when it was ascertained that ballot harvesting occurred
right,
by one operative of the Republican candidate who won the election, the State Board of Elections determined that there should be another election.
right,
And that didn't happen, actually, because the person who won the election chose not to be seated, I believe.
right.
And so that's a vacant seat right now. So it's a huge expense. It's a huge expense to run an election, and it's a huge expense to do a do-over. And so is there likely to be a new election ordered in this case? It is unlikely.
Right. So the more likely thing would be to throw it to the House in states that may be disputed or the courts don't feel comfortable about the sanctity of the vote. Is that sort of the only outcome the Trump campaign can hope for?
I think at this point, with several legal challenges having made their way through the courts and courts not deciding to intervene in favor of the campaign, there's only one or two cases that I think are still outstanding. The more likely scenario, if you can even call that likely, is electors in those states or the state legislature determining to cast the electors in a different direction.
Right.
That too is extremely unlikely. Okay, so let's be very blunt about it. I know people are theorizing that that's a way to quote unquote save the election. It's it's an extraordinary act for a legislature to go against what has been certified as the election
sure.
results in a state. The reason why the founders designed it so that it would be the legislature is because the legislature is accountable. So if they violate the will of the people in this instance, they can count on being thrown out of office in the next election. So that's what's at stake there.
It's a powerful check and balance for sure. One last quick question. You talked about the bias and things that occur in this election. Jack Dorsey, the Twitter CEO, testified today. It was a mistake, he says, after the election to have blocked the Hunter Biden stories before the election. Your thought on this whole censorship thing real quickly.
Well, of course, he's saying that after the fact, but that's it's completely irrelevant. And I think it's frankly disingenuous. When it mattered, he did the wrong thing. And that's what you can count on in the future. They've shown us who they are.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, Harmeet, we can't thank you enough for joining us. Your expertise is always greatly appreciated. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you in the days and weeks ahead as these final lawsuits play their way out.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to go to a quick commercial break. And we'll be right back.
An election special with John Solomon.